What dark secret are you hiding from everyone? I witnessed my fiance's suicide last year. I moved states afterwards and started a new life. My coworkers, clients, and new friends call me the sunshine of whatever room I walk into, but I'm completely dead inside. Even though I choose to fake it, I resent them for not seeing how fucked up I am. I have a secret fantasy life, populated with imaginary friends. It started in grade school, and I have continued all my life. I am in my 50s now, and still prefer to be alone in my imaginary world instead of being with family or friends. I can't even tell my psychiatrist because I am afraid he will lock me up or give me drugs to make it all stop. Last Christmas I leaned my sister and I don't have the same father and are technically half-sisters. My sister's biological father tried to start a relationship with my mom that resulted in a pregnancy and ultimately didn't work out. That biological father is dead now, but I didn't probe any further about his identity or how he died in case it was something traumatic for my mom to remember. So she raised my sister as a single mother at my grandma's house in the 80s, then she met my father and they started dating and it worked out because they got married in the 90s, moved into a new house. And a short time after that I was born. She told me never call my sister my half-sister and just pretend all of this doesn't matter because she's my sister and I'm keeping it that way, and if anyone asks about the 10-year age gap I just tell them, it's a long story. I'm the spitting image of my grandpa on my dad's side. Both my parents are almost a foot shorter than me, but I'm almost the same height as him. When my mother got sick when I was a kid, my grandpa went to visit her daily for extended periods of time in the hospital. In his final months, she did the same. After he passed, we found out he kept a whole other family on the side in secret too. Looking back at my dad's military deployment history, it would also be dicey if she could have gotten pregnant by him around the appropriate time. Based on a collection of various hunches, I'm fairly convinced I'm the product of an affair between my mother and supposed grandfather. More disturbingly, this would probably be one of the most lighthearted revelations about my family. When I was 16, I conspired with a heroin addict I met online to help me off myself with heroin and dump my body in a dumpster in exchange for my valuables. I lived in a small town and he was in a bigger city where my school had an upcoming trip. We planned for me to slip away during the trip and meet up with him to do the deed. He chickened out last minute and ghosted me. When I was young, probably around age 9 or 10, I was walking home with my dog from a house around the block when he cut the corner and walked diagonally through the yard of this super mean old lady who lived at the end of your street. She was in her yard at the time tending to these really fancy looking rose bushes she had growing in beds along the border with her neighbor. My dog was a very friendly golden retriever who didn't even really come near her and certainly didn't do anything threatening, but she sprayed the fuck out of him with some kind of insecticide or other chemical she was using on her roses. I ran back home with the dog and hosed him off. He coughed a bunch, but seemed otherwise fine. I didn't tell my parents because somehow I thought I was going to get into trouble for letting the dog walk in her yard. I'm glad I didn't tell them, though, because I decided that night to sneak downstairs, out the half-bath window, and down the street to her yard where I cut down every goddamn rose bush I could get my hands on. I'm convinced a neighbor poisoned our family dog. We got her when I was in 2nd grade. The poisoning happened when I was in college. They left notes on our door threatening to hurt the dog if she shit in their yard again, but our dog never went to their yard. Anyhow, she fell very ill very fast. She was in intense pain from her insides. She'd let out screams in pain. I don't know if you have ever heard a dog scream. That's the best I can describe it. It wasn't a cry, howl, or bark, it was a haunting scream. She couldn't get comfortable. I'd hold her to try to comfort her and she'd be okay for a few seconds and then another scream. We had to put her down. It was the only humane thing to do. I was devastated. It was like losing a sibling. It still hurts, and this was almost 20 years ago. Not long after that, our area had a natural disaster. The whole city was flooded. We moved back in pretty quickly. BC. My dad was a carpenter, but most people took longer to return, including that neighbor. Let's just say, every snake, reptile, rat, or any other nasty creature that my crazy dad came across, and there was a lot due to the disaster, was brought straight to their yard and inside their house. For months, I smile to imagine the house of horrors that they return to. It still wasn't enough though. In another world I'd love to burn them inside their house. But alas, civilization. I make up lies about what I do on the weekend. Usually I don't do much and I'm very content with that. Others are always asking me what I'm doing and I never had anything to tell them. I make up lies to get out of phone calls, or plans. Saying I'm out of town or with friends. I love just being left alone. When I was a teenager, I worked at a novelty tourist shop near me. Being the idiot that I was, I stole a wad of cash from the store. It was $100 in ones. I told nobody, but they knew it was missing. Right about the same time, a coworker who was always trying to get me fired was telling someone she got about $100 in tips from her other job. They ended up firing her because they didn't trust that it wasn't her. Not super dark, but mine is also stealing from my employer. It was a seasonal job and they told people if you came back next season you'd get a raise. Next season one got a 50-cent per hour raise and mentioned it to a couple other people who had also returned, who it turned out didn't get a raise. They went and complained to the boss, who then took my raise back and gave them each 25-cent raises. I argued with the boss for a bit but eventually just decided I'd steal a few bucks per shift to make up the difference. I've struggled with disordered eating for at least a decade. It ebbs and flows. I know it's unhealthy, but the toxic part of me loves the feeling of being empty. Several years ago it was really bad. I was at my lowest weight ever. I had brain fog, difficulty breathing. When I started eating again my stomach would get really bloated even if I only ate a small amount. I gained weight in the last year or so and my depression and anxiety got really bad for a while. My family thinks I don't want to spend time with them. However, I just wanted to stay home because trying on my clothes and the idea of being in public made me want to kill myself. It was easier on me mentally to just stay home. I can feel myself slipping back into my old disordered eating habits unfortunately. Hi, I'm an eating disorder therapist and I hate to break it to you if you don't deep down know this already, but you have an eating disorder and there are specialized therapists like myself that can help you through this. The bloating is caused by refeeding and it can be dangerous if not monitored medical care and team. Since basically you are starving yourself before your body is struggling to get the right bacteria to digest your food again. Plus your body is very taxed by lack of proper nutrition and it's going to be hard mentally as well as physically. Eating disorders are not something to be taken lightly and it's so important to get mental health help because it's a mind thing that then affects your body. Many people die from eating disorders or shorten their lifespan. Please get professional help from an eating disorder team. And everyone stop minimizing it and calling it disordered eating. 2 years ago one of my best friends and I went halvesies on a fuck ton of Xanax. On June 8th we both took Xanax from the batch we split. I woke up, he didn't. No one knows I had anything to do with the drugs that killed him, and I don't know if I can ever bring myself to tell someone. A man broke into my home about 10 years ago. Well, kind of. He knocked. I answered the door, and he pushed his way in. He spoke about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and tried to extort N for protection or he and his brothers of doom would come and kill me. He was huge, ex-Navy, if he was to be believed. Drunk as hell, hand covered in blood holding a broken bottle. I was terrified. I told him to leave. He wouldn't. He was getting aggressive. I told him I would splatter his brains against the wall if he didn't. I didn't have a gun at the time. Anyway, he didn't leave. I went into my kitchen and grabbed a knife and sliced at him a few times. He staggered away, seemingly okay. I assumed he was all right, just wounded a bit. I never saw him again. A neighbor told me days later a man was found dead, some wounds on his arms. I can only guess he bled out, but I never got questioned, somehow. There was a lot of blood in and around my house. I lived in a pretty seedy area so I guess the cops just didn't care. The guy was apparently a repeat criminal. I killed a man at least indirectly and have never told anybody. When I was younger I lived with my grandmother. Not long after I turned 18 her health started to decline, that sort of decline that you know means she won't be around for much longer. Over the months I did my best to take care of her. Getting her to the hospital when she needed, and other things. We had someone coming every day to help her with things I couldn't. Well, what my family doesn't know is that the night she passed, I was in the living room watching TV. My dog was in bed with my grandma, and I started to hear him whimper and bark. I knew what was happening. I knew that if I acted I could potentially save her. I didn't want to watch her suffer anymore though, to watch her live with so much pain, and unable to do anything for herself anymore. So I made the choice to let her pass before making any calls. She lived 92 years, and the only regret I have is that she passed a month after I would have graduated if I hadn't been kicked out of school. She had been in good enough health at the time to go to my graduation. I still kick myself for how stupid I was back then. I didn't expect this much support. Thanks. I'm not too torn up about letting her pass. I knew it was for the best. She was such a great person. She didn't deserve to live in such a poor manner any longer than she already had. I don't regret what I did. I regret what I had done that got me kicked out of school, that I didn't try and make it to graduation for her. I think I've lived my life so far in a way that she'd be proud of. Not graduating before she passed is the only regret I really have in this life so far, and I'm 35 now. So I think I'm doing pretty good. I feel you. When my dad died of cancer, after a painful final night, during which my brother and I took turns watching over him, we both waited to call 911. We wanted to make sure he was dead. We used that thing you put on your finger that measures oxygen in your blood, to be safe. My brother and I ended up waiting a few hours, getting our bearings, crying, talking. It was surreal. When I tried to pull off the device, my dad had already gone into rigor mortis and his finger wouldn't budge. That's one of my clearest memories of that day. It's heartbreaking hearing of so many people who were sexually assaulted as children and feeling like they have no option but to hide it, lest it cause irreparable rifts between friends, family, and other close ones. Just want to let all of you affected by this know that if you did go public, you're not the cause of any conflict, no matter how anybody else paints it. You were the victim of one of the most heinous things one human being can do to another. The source of conflict is all down to whoever perpetrated the violence against you, and the shame should not be yours to live with. It's not my secret, but my mom's. And I'm not hiding it from everyone, just the person who it potentially matters to the most. When my mom was in high school in the 60s, she had a long-term serious boyfriend named Jimmy. They were each other's first, they were together for years, and were planning on getting married. He went away to college, my mom stayed behind, but they were still together. You know what happened next. He cheated and got the new girl pregnant. He comes home to break the news to my mom. Abortion was not legal at the time. He basically says that he wants to be with my mom, but he has no choice but to marry this other girl. My mom was devastated. Here's the secret. My mom was also pregnant by him, but hadn't told him yet. She decided she wasn't ever going to tell him. Jimmy went on to marry the other girl and never knew my mom was also pregnant. She told me that she later threw herself down a flight of stairs to cause a miscarriage. My mom actually reconnected with Jimmy during the early days of Facebook. She didn't have an account, but asked me to look for him using mine. He was still married to the same person. My mom was married to my dad. They wrote to each other for a while using my account. Closing parenthesis dot, signed their messages saying, "I love you." My mom passed away a number of years ago. I think about this knowledge I have that Jimmy doesn't. This major life event thing that he doesn't even know happened. That could have changed the trajectory of many lives. I'm certainly not going to tell him. It's not my secret to tell. Edit. There seems to be a part of the story that I didn't make clear enough. My mom had a miscarriage and never had that baby. It was intentional miscarriage by throwing herself down the stairs. Jimmy is not my father. I had an IBS attack once and had to violently shit in a church grounds behind someone's car. Used underwear to wipe to and left that there. Not proud. IBS attack once. I had one in high school. I managed to clean any trace, and nobody found out. Nobody knew, except my father, who was unusually helpful, understood me, and supported me. And never talked about it again. It was my darkest secret half of my life, but then I understood that it's natural, and that I've took the good decisions and I have nothing to be shamefully about. And also, I have way darker secrets now. My wife, her mom and I bought a house about 2 years ago, Just from talking to the neighbors I'd gathered that the family who lived here before had a daughter that was mixed up with the wrong people. We had some random person knock on our door at night saying he needed gas. We are down a long driveway. No way you'd randomly walk up to our house to ask for help. I think he was looking for the people who used to live here. And then another time Sunday morning making pancakes for the family, I get a knock on the door and it's 4 sheriff's officers saying they received a 911 call that hung up and it was from the house. We don't have a landline and I assured them my wife and 2-year-old did not make any call. They mentioned a name of the previous occupants and I let them know we moved in earlier this year and they seemed okay with that and left. Anyways, I was doing some yard work and struck up conversation with the neighbor. He saw the police cars and asked what was up. I told him the situation and he just goes, "Oh yeah, that family was messed up." The cops were probably being cautious considering the shooting. "What shooting?" I asked. He kinda looks at me with a sad, worried face. "The shooting in your house." Wait, what? I say, truly baffled. He then proceeds to tell me that about 2 years before, the father in the house confronted his daughter and boyfriend he didn't like and shot and killed the boyfriend in the house. Our state doesn't have a disclosure law, so we never knew. I was blown away. All the strange happenings kinda made sense now. He said the friends of the victim had kinda terrorized them for a while cause the police were taking so long to press charges, slashed tears, midnight fireworks, odd shit that the neighbors hated. I was shocked but just said, "That's crazy, but hey, do me a favor and never tell my wife or Mill about that. They are a little spooked by things like that." So the TRDL is that we live in a murder house and I'm the only one of my family that knows. My PTSD isn't getting better. I have nightly nightmares of the industrial accident I was in. I see my coworker ripping his burnt face off every night. I no longer scream in my sleep because of it. I'm no longer terrified as much by it. Even though I know it's not my fault, I feel an enormous amount of guilt for what happened to him. Sometimes when I'm not sleeping, I'll hear the scream he made in the distance and it'll make my blood feel like ice. Therapy hasn't done much. I found my adoption papers a few years ago when I was looking for a copy of my birth certificate. I know my birth mom, I just never had a relationship with her. My maternal grandmother took me in 2002. I never knew she adopted me, I just knew that one day I ended up living with her after telling her one day I don't want to go back home, lol. I also found the letter that my mom wrote as to why she was giving me up. That one really hurt. Didn't expect this many upvotes, honestly, lol. Thank you everyone for your kind words. My grandma is really the sweetest person ever. I'm forever grateful for her, but I just wanted to say now that I'm older I understand why my mom did what she did, and believe it or not we actually have a cordial relationship now, lol. Edit 2. This brought back some unsettling feelings. I thought I was over, lol, but I want to thank you guys for your own stories and kind words. They made me realize that I'm not the only one who had a rough life growing up, and I shouldn't let that stop me from healing and being the best that I can be. This has been one of the worst years of my life. I've been taking loss after loss and I honestly felt like unaliving myself. I kept coming back to read the comments and I see how strong everyone is and didn't let what they went through stop them from doing better. So I just wanted to say that I've made an appointment to start therapy again, and I'm going to be completely honest about how I truly feel and open up more. Thank you so much, Reddit. Also, I haven't been the best granddaughter lately, so I'm spending more quality time with my grandma and helping her out with whatever she needs. My grandma was in a car accident and broke her ankle, so she stayed at my house, and my mom, we took care of her while she recovered. I was entering puberty at the time and discovered that you could order porn on cable and was like a madman ordering porn. The bill that month came out to $500. My mom thought it was my grandma because her novellas were on like channel 50 to 60 and the porn was 500 to 600 info 00. I've literally never told anyone to this day. ETA. I am Latina and sex porn for women is still pretty taboo in my culture, so that's why I'm so scared to tell anyone. Even if my mom and I are pretty open with each other, I'm still embarrassed. However, my grandma passed away in 2019 and I felt compelled to tell my secret, but my mom sees that story as a funny memory she has of my grandma that she likes to look back on and laugh about, so IDK. If I should, lol. Juliet Alpha 5 Mo. 8 awards. Not a huge secret in comparison to some of these answers, but I feel the guilt of it often. After my fiance passed, I napped all the time for over a year. My aunt was calling me one day and I just denied her call, went back to napping. It was my aunt calling because my grandma, who was very sick with cancer, wanted to say happy birthday a day before my birthday. Grandma died the next day. I should have picked up the damn phone. In high school, I was a super good kid. Straight A student who loved homework, keeping out of trouble, and who was quiet as hell during class. So anyway, there was this guy who was also in AP classes with me, but he was super loud and obnoxious but would pull stunts in such a way that he would have some margin of plausible deniability. Though we never spoke, I'm not sure he even knew I existed. He rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe it was from the one cold day when this other girl in our class had her nipples poking through her shirt. BC she forgot a sweater and he kept saying to her, "Daamn, it's cold, huh?" Maybe it was from when he would pretend to be friends with kid who was definitely spectrum and desperate to be friends with him to do the bully's homework for him and then bully him the next day. IDK. So at random, sometimes once a week or a month or once every couple of months, I would whistle. It's this high-pitched whistle that sounds like a tea kettle that I can do while barely moving my mouth. Back then, no one knew I could do it except for my family. The super obnoxious kid always got in trouble. I was never once suspected. My brother and I did a 23andMe. We discovered we have a half-sibling, same father, who is older than us. I messaged them but no reply. Since the half-sibling is older, it was during my father's military career, which was short-lived because he got a dishonorable discharge that he hides from his family still. Kind of similar story here. 6 years ago when I was 24, my mom randomly told me I have an older half-sister that my dad completely abandoned. She only knew of my sister's mother's name, so I searched for her on Facebook and found my sister. She is the spitting image of our father, so I knew immediately it was true. Both my sister and her mom confirmed it, and my sister and I immediately started bonding. We are incredibly close now. My father's side was overjoyed when I found her, as they knew of her but never what happened to her. We've all welcomed her with open arms, except my father. When she reached out to him, he essentially told her to fuck off, then screamed at me that she wasn't my sister, and continues to call me the bitch that ruined the family. Her and I did 23andMe and we matched as half-siblings, so now there's no denying it. I lost a shitty father but gained an incredible sibling that means 10x more to me. My grandpa was stationed in Okinawa, Japan during the Korean War, while in the Marines. He hooked up with a woman there, and she got pregnant. So, I have a Japanese aunt and a few cousins, in Japan, whom I've never met before. My wife and I aren't officially married. No one knows. We had a ceremony and everything, reception, the whole 9 yards. We just never did the official paperwork. We realized that since she's going back to school, it benefits her financially to go through financial aid as single, rather than married. When she finishes up, we're going to head over to town hall and finish the last step. I never have other plans that I just can't cancel. 5 o'clock. Solve world hunger and tell no one. 5:30. 4 o'clock. Wallow in self-pity. 4:30. Stare into the abyss. Jazzercise. 6:30. Dinner with me. I can't cancel that again. 7 o'clock. Wrestle with my self-loathing. I'm booked. Of course, if I bump the loathing to 9, one could still be done in time to lay in my bed, stare at the ceiling and slip slowly into madness. I was married for 13 years to my best friend. We had what I thought was a great, easy marriage. One day our 5-year-old daughter told me he was having her perform oral sex on him. I was shocked, devastated and afraid. He was one of those fun guys everyone loves to be around. Elle immediately called the police and he was arrested. When they started investigating him, they found out that he had been arrested while in college for exposing himself to very young boys. He only got a slap on the wrist that time because he came from a very wealthy family. One of his uncles was governor of the state we lived in. I was so ashamed I told our friends that he had an affair and moved away. But the truth was that he was in prison for 5 years. I picked up the pieces, sent our daughter to therapy and spent the next 15 years being a mother. Paying for private school, cool trips, etc. She was my life. Then when she went to college he reached out to her over Facebook. When I saw she was communicating with him I was shocked, devastated and afraid all over again. I called and told her that she was an adult but I thought she should be careful because he's not safe. She hung up on me and has not spoken to me since. That was 4 years ago. I send her $40,000 a year still to pay for her medical school. It's all been almost unbelievable. Thank you for allowing me to share it here. People like him are able to spin things around and convince people spin-off stories. I wouldn't be surprised if he has convicted her that you made all that up or something like that. You did the right thing to protect your daughter. You did not ignore the problem like some others do. You did nothing wrong. I applaud you. I hope you find your peace. One day, maybe your daughter will realize you did the best you could. In middle school I made a smoking pipe out of copper pipe just for fun. I know you should not smoke out of copper as the fumes are potentially toxic. My stepdad took it from me and started using it. He smoked with it for years. I hated him for physically abusing me, so I never said anything. It's now 30 years later and he was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's and likely only has a few years to live. I hope he rots in hell. I don't know if it had any effect, but I like to think the copper pipe played a role in his sickness as karma for being an asshole. My wife is handicapped and I lied to her that I find it hard to clean cut up mushrooms. She has self-esteem issues because I can do things much easily than her. So I lied, and now she feels better. I think I'm beginning to lose my mind. Lately I've been having trouble remembering things that I've known for years. Sometimes when people talk to me their words just don't make sense to me when everyone else seems to get it. I've become super paranoid. I'm having an extremely hard time concentrating, and I've been finding it more and more difficult to talk to people. I'm kind of scared. Edit. I'm only 26, never had COVID. Everyone here is throwing out big diagnoses, but you should talk to your doctor. It could be something as minor as thyroid issues. I get really bad brain fog when I'm not medicated or if my levels are wrong, like to the point where I feel like I've suddenly developed Alzheimer's. Hopefully you get it sorted out soon so you can start feeling better. Most people in my family think that my mother recently died suddenly from complications due to cancer, but she really died from the toxic effects of oxycodone, morphine, fentanyl and methamphetamine. Seems as though she just had herself a secret death party. Sounds like the concoction my mom drank on her last day in September, but it was sanctioned by the state Colorado made. It was a beautiful day with all of us there. She was eager to be done with her body. I'm sorry for your loss. One of my closest coworkers, who is an integral part to our very large corporation, killed a man in his late teens and threw the body in a lake. He only got off on a technicality. I work remotely so I don't build a lot of personal relationships with people I work with regularly. I googled his full name. It freaked me out at first. But I've kinda gotten over it. I wonder if anyone else knows. It happened 40 plus years ago. He will retire soon and then I might ask another coworker about it. I just don't want to stir the pot. My husband's best friend Mark was watching America's Most Wanted one night and they did a segment on a guy who looked just like a tenant of his. Luckily Mark lived in his own house while the tenant lived in a 3-family house Mark owned. Mark called the number while the show was still airing. Tenant was picked up and he was the right guy. He had no idea he'd been featured on AMW a few hours earlier. Edit. The tenant committed murder, but it wasn't an exciting national murder story. It was some kind of biker beef in the PNW. The house Mark owned was in Queens, NY. Mark called the number on AMW and the guy was arrested a few hours later by what neighbors said were throngs of Leo. As for nationally known murders, I went to Catholic school with a girl who was murdered by her older brother. He killed the rest of her family too. Her name was Dawn DeFeo and she was a very nice, quiet girl. Her brother was a dirtbag and so were the couple who moved into their house after the murders, the Lutzes. This scumbag husband and wife, George and Kathy Lutz, got together with a 2-bit writer and they cooked up the Amityville Horror. Nowadays domestic murders are in the news every day, but back then they were so few and far between that scammers were able to turn a family tragedy into a fucking franchise. Happily, the Lutzes didn't live to be senior citizens.